The origin of creation. This universe, that seems so enormous to us within it, was made with a needle and thimble, with which he carved a corner of the wilds beyond. A small boy was one of the many animals in the wilds that were hunted by Sekhmet. The child, then less than the simplest peasant, stumbled across the oasis, where Bastet slept in the daytime. He drank from the waters there. She awoke, made to attack the little child for their trespass, when he fell on his knees and begged, in shed, that she take pity, have mercy on him. She'd never been asked for mercy before, and so when she granted it, she became the goddess of mercies. Great power and wisdom awoke in her at that very instant. She kicked back her head, and roared a commanding roar, so loud it shook the wilds. She let the child prince go, turning to him with a pledge. I am my husband's first and then yours. No harm will come to you, but I cannot guarantee the same for any of your children. I am bound to you by oath, to watch you sleep, that you may rest in peace, fair prince. None in the wilds shall harm you hence. The child backed away, through tears and quivers, off across the sands, and she forgot him. The child, immune to the predations of the wilds beyond, became a student of it, and returned years later as a man to the oasis, with a wife, and a set of tools he created, the needle and thimble. He greeted Bastet, who barely remembered the boy, and demonstrated for her, there and then, the power of his manufacture. As he drew the needle back and forth, now more like a magician's wand than mere needle, as it spun golden thread from thin air, he stitched and wove together the kingdom of creation before their very eyes, from nothing but was there before it. Bastet looked on in, at how he created, for hours and hours. Soon, Basekh came home from the hunt, with his tithes to the queen. He too lay on the cool sands by the oasis, as hot day turned to clear night, and all the sky celestial bore witness to the king's unending labor. At dawn, he finished, and the first day began in the kingdom of creation. All the spirits of this new realm, the man and wife, Bastet, and Sekhmet, marched along the promenade, to the palace at the center of the town. Into the throne room, and witnessed the coronation of the boy, now the man, as ruler of the kingdom before and beyond. For the rest of the first day, the whole of creation celebrated wildly, and as sun set, Bastet spoke to the king. Above your throne room sits the tabernacle, sweet boy, where you shall sleep in peace under my vigil. By my life, no harm shall come to the crown, or you, through the darkness. At dawn, I shall depart with my king, but I shall return each evening that you can sleep peacefully. And so it was that the kingdom was born. The myth of Basekh. The kingdom before and beyond had an opulent throne room guarded by Bastet, the sapphire great cat, partner to Sekhmet, the emerald cat who ruled all predators, the all-eating, her consort. The fierce giant cats of the wild do not live in the kingdom of creation, so they journeyed through the town to the king's palace daily, usually terrifying the fearful spirits residing there as they passed through. Bastet strode ceremoniously serene through the town, save hissing at Sekhmet, who busily terrorized the locals, chasing them, swiping at their houses, eating offerings. If a loose chicken or goat or ran away from its owner as Sekhmet passed, he'd gobble it up in a bite. From dusk until sunrise, Bastet was bound by duty of oath to guard the palace of the king while he slept. During the day, she slept by an oasis in the wilds beyond, while Sekhmet prowled the nude plains, established his dominion, and brought home offerings of meals for his beloved. One day, the king joked that if the two were to produce an offspring, of equal parts dutiful and dominant as Bastet and Sekhmet themselves were, it would be the most splendid, perhaps perfect, being. Seeing the child as a challenge, not to mention more than a little curious of the result themselves, the couple that night consorted and brought forth the first known litter of phalanx. Some were blue with green eyes, some green with eyes blue. Some were half and half, diagonally, orthogonally, or striped. Some all blue except a green tail. Any part of their ears, paws, whiskers, noses, claws, tongues, eyes, all some mixture of the two, and there were 22 in that first litter. Sekhmet carved out 22 principalities in her endless empire of the wilds beyond, and gave one to each of her children. He then had a troubling thought. The king's joke was that they could create the perfect being, in their offspring. Does that mean that they'd be more perfect than Sekhmet himself? In his haste, he presumed that the king knew this, as he too was an apex predator. He mulled over the conspiracy that either subconsciously or superconsciously, omniscient as the king was, he had seized the opportunity to end Sekhmet's hegemony over the unruly wilds through the curse of her perfect offspring. Thence stirred and arose in Basekh a pernicious and raging jealousy of the little kittens, so he set out to change the stakes and secure his rule. Look, Bastet, at how our beautiful children frolic and play. They shall each have great domains of their own to rule, but alas, he sighed, they'll never know our happiness. Bastet looked at him, alarmed for her children. Whatever could they be deprived of that my wild lord and the man-king's guardian cannot provide them? He looked at him deep in the sapphire eyes. Why, the love that made them, of course. For we made them only the once, and only one, such that there would never be enough among the 22 of them, each confined in their domains, to fall in love, to breathe life into their own litters. She gasped, "You're right, my love. What should we do?" He pretended to ponder this quandary. Well, what if we have more? Let us make in our love 22 more, a concubine for each prince, that perchance they may grow to love another as I do you. And if and when they so choose, they too can consort and birth more of our same joy into life. Bastet, I will carry the burden this time, that we can say, though our love cast these cousins to life, that they and theirs are of two different mothers. Bastet sobbed, eyes filled with tears, "Oh Sekhmet, of course I will. I will, 1,000 times." The two consorted in the afternoon, and Sekhmet stayed by the oasis that night carrying the litter in her belly, while Bastet marched alone to guard the throne. She spoke at length with the king, who held an evening court and ribald entertainment most nights before retiring to sleep in his tabernacle. Bastet was bound by a preternatural oath, to guard the crown, its throne, and his tabernacle, that he might sleep soundly. Not many knew as well as Bastet, perhaps not even the king, the many threats to his majesty, of all sizes and strengths. Imagine for a moment, all that might entreat against the progenitor of any realm, let alone this god-king's, all of the devils and rogues that would usurp his crown and sit atop the throne of all creation, what they could do with such power. From the smallest insect dipped in poison, bred and trained to crawl down his throat, to vast hordes of demons gathering to challenge him in battle, Bastet met all the challenges while he slept peaceful beside his wife, the dreams he had becoming the seeds through which he'd plant creation the next day. "Where is dear Sekhmet, whom I cannot remember when last I saw you without?" asked the king to his guardian as she arrived. "He sleeps by the oasis tonight, my king. In the afternoon whence returned from a grand hunt in the plains, we consorted again and he lies fertile with more of my children." The king applauded, "Oh what joy, what joy! Already your litter is so full of fun and wonder, you are most wise to bring more to life." And the whole court nodded and agreed. Bastet accepted the compliment, settling to her duty, while the king took in a great banquet. She returned the next day to find Sekhmet still asleep, belly full and fat, now heavily pregnant just as Bastet was before. He left her to sleep and went into the wilds to do the hunt, then feed his bride now unfit to do so herself. A thought entered Bastet's head then as she stalked her colossal prey. When she was with litter, she'd stayed with the king during the night and Sekhmet hunted in the day. When she was close to birth and briefly too incapacitated to perform her vigil, Sekhmet took over and protected the king. But if she was now the one birthing their litter, then Bastet will have to do both duties as well. She accepted this reality humbly and grateful, but unbeknownst to all but the malevolence from whence the deed was planned, an opportunity had unwittingly presented itself wherein, from hunting all day and guarding all night, Bastet became steadily wearied, catching only momentary respite in brief intervals. An opportunity for the son of the king to usurp his father's title and take his crown. By his father's original design, the son and father were to rule together when he came of age, as equals, but the son was by fate's design drawn to killing his father and taking all for himself, covetous of the crown of creation and its endless potential. There were many obstacles to his insurrection, the indomitable Bastet being a major one, but also that he must do so undetected. The realm would not accept any sovereign's rule birthed of regicide, even the hint of suspicion was anathema. Guilt, on the other hand, was no such obstacle to the ignoble endeavor. The heir was also the royal custodian as part of his duties, and noticing Bastet's weariness gave him an idea. He approached the snoozing, swole Sekhmet, powering away through heaving breaths on the stone floor of the king's throne room. "Ah, beautiful Sekhmet, you are in your full bloom. How much you remind me of my own wife when with my sires. Are you comfortable?" Sekhmet sighed, "Yes indeed, fair prince, very comfortable and well. My queen Bastet diligently works the wilds to feed our unborn kin and their sedent mother. It burdens me to see her so tired, unable to sleep in her familiar tranquils." The prince cocked his head. "She isn't sleeping." "Ah yes, the same happened to me when my wife was pregnant." "Alas, it is the symptom of their anxiety, the long vigil of the husband while his heirs grow, the anticipation, the dread. All of it disturbs the sleep." Sekhmet was comforted by the prince's wisdom, remembering his own anxieties when Bastet carried before. "I look forward to the end of these times, when I might again rule my kingdom by the daylight, and my queen in the night. I too recall, when I was at my most fatigued, how she would sing to me by the oasis, her heavenly voice always able to soothe my soul." "Ah yes, of course. Mine burdens too would be assuaged with but my wife's gentle rubbing my back with the flat of her soft hands." The prince chuckled. "I'd awaken with a snort some hours later and she would laugh how I slept right through breakfast." "Oh prince," Sekhmet chuckled, "make me not laugh, my every movement is agony." The prince continued, "Forsooth, it is the wife's domain alone as to how her husband might be comforted to rest. Pray tell, do you not know how your own heart's love could similarly be relieved of her travails?" Sekhmet pondered deeply. He'd never thought about those things while the husband of the two. She is so rigid and structured, but I remember there was a herb of incense. Some lavender or other, and she would drop to sleep at the first whiff of it. I've heard your subjects call it the cat's cradle for that very reason." The prince laughed. "Ah yes, just as they call a jug of their wine the royal regret I reckon, given the horrific headache it gives peasants to princes the next day." The two friends laughed again, Sekhmet aching with cramps, and then the prince left to attend court. When given the time later, he ordered all the cat's cradle in the town be brought to him inconspicuously. A day or so before Sekhmet was due to give birth, the king's privy council convinced him to call a Sabbath, where all work in the kingdom would end and the people rested. The king would still require guarding of course, but no governance would take place that day, and instead they had a feast and celebrated. The feast continued long into the night as Bastet guarded the whole affair, and the king and his wife declared they were going to retire to their tabernacle, but encouraged the party-goers to continue their ribaldries. Bastet looked on, worrying about Sekhmet, who was alone at the oasis, too pregnant now to even move to the throne room. One of the noble barons who much admired Bastet came to her with a plate of food and greeted her jovially. "Bastet, are you well this evening? Or perchance is it morning yet? I've lost all track of time," he chuckled, perhaps a little bit more drunk than he was initially aware. Bastet warmly replied, "My good friend, I am very well but my mind is elsewhere. How fare you and your wife?" "She is well and sitting on my squire's lap, the old tease." He threw her a knowing glance, then both laughed. "I've managed to snatch you the last few of these fish they brought in for the feast. Some invention of that chef in the town, what's his name? Anyway, I figured you could maybe bring some home to all sake along with my regards." Bastet was moved by the gesture and more than a little curious about the new delicacy, one of her duties being a royal taster. "It really is something else. He roasts it with some secret of herb or spice, then dries that out into this blistering jerky on a spit. It concentrates the flavor, it's like tasting the sea. Bastet salivated, her stomach groaning at the suggestion, thinking about the breakfast she would have otherwise had to hunt for the two when dawn broke shortly. My dear fellow, I appreciate the gesture and will of course send on your regards. As you can hear from my stomach, breakfast cannot come sooner and we shall feast on these. Elated, the happy Baron bounced off to pry his wife from the lusty squire's grip and get a final drink. As the party embers smouldered in the dying night hours, Bastet opened the basket and took a deep sniff of the fish jerky. And in an instant, fell asleep. Across the throne room, the prince set to work, clearing out the last dregs of celebrants. He slipped into the tabernacle and sliced his father's throat with a knife, his wakening mother's too, to ensure there was no witness. He left through the throne room just before dawn broke, and the morning trumpets heralded Bastet's departure. Huh? She stirred with the snort from the nap to see the throne room empty, the basket of fish jerky waiting, and light peeping under the door. The king would not awaken early, she reckoned, given the night before, though she couldn't help notice the familiar malodor of spilt blood. She rushed out through the stirring town to the oasis, to his bride. He arrived to find his wan, sinewy wife nursing mass of small kittens, mewling blindly for her teat. Bastet smiled and wept, dropped the jerky like a tide in front of his goddess and looked upon his children. All 23 of them. As the young family slept and the kittens plodded helplessly around the oasis, all seemed well in the wilds beyond. Meanwhile the kingdom was astir, the spirits waking to news of their ruler's carcass cold on the tabernacle bed, and a succession crisis unfolding. The sun set and Bastet went to attend court again alone. Sekhmet would dispatch the children to their lands the next day after a rest. When she arrived, a booming voice greeted her from the king's throne that was not the one she expected. Greetings, Bastet, the son's voice rang out. No doubt you've heard the news of my father's passing. Her heart sank at the news the other love of her life passed. How? He is immortal, and she'd guarded the tabernacle all night. It had to be a lie, one of the king's classic pranks against her. No, I assure you my father is dead, the new king continued. We have been named king as his heir presumptive, and shall have our coronation in the coming days. Then we can decide what to do with you. She looked at him, puzzled. What do you mean by do with me, sire? Well, you are bound by your oath to protect the king's heir until the crown passes, after which your duty would be held fulfilled and you may return to the wilds. The king rhymed off the text of her covenant with his father, as her head spun at the speed with which events unfolded. But the new king stood smiling, hands out in a gesture of comfort. Now, my beautiful feline, you will be looked after. We may even allow you to form a new covenant with us, if you choose to do so yourself. Forsooth we will need a fierce guardian to defend us from the horrors our father endured. And, if you were to choose to forego this boon, you would retire in splendid comfort, forever welcome in these lands and our throne room. Now, we must attend to affairs of court. And like that, the kingdom passed to the sun. As morning came, Bastet ran off to the oasis to inform Basekh. His what? Dead you say? Sekhmet could hardly keep up as she explained it all in riveting detail, peppered and punctuated with her own thoughts and questions. How did he die? Who is investigating? When did it happen? Didn't the new king seem awfully happy about the whole thing? Why can't she shake her feelings about him? And his being crowned tonight? Goodness my love, you've had quite the night. Basekh had long since weaned the kittens, who grew much faster than normal ones, and sent them to the realms they'd rule with their kin. I tried to divvy them up in such a way that they balanced out. But we still have this one to deal with. He pointed to the tenacious boy kitten currently gnawing at this tail. Take him and go sleep, my love. I am eager to retake my crown and have a good hunt. They kissed and Basekh departed, leaving the parent and child in their oasic bliss. They slept, ate, played, cuddled, told stories, and Bastet groomed and fussed over him, her little Basekh. She would debut him to the court tonight with her lover, all the royalty of kingdom and wild convened under one roof. Her fun with her kitten was occasionally interrupted by intrusive thoughts of the previous night's events, whether the king was really dead or not. At the coronation, overseen by all in the realm, Basekh came forward and bowed down to the crown, then said, "I must decline your covenant, sire, for I fear it is built upon an unsteady foundation. But as compensation instead, I give to you my only son and heir, Basekh, to be your chamber guard, guarantor of your rule from the wilds." "I too consent to this arrangement, man king," Basekh growled from the corner, spooking the noble women nearby, who giggled nervously at their own jumpiness. "My son will watch you as you sleep, should you wish it." The king pondered, his face screwing and smoothing as he reasoned through the proposal. "And what will you do after, Basekh? And Basekh?" "We have all the wilds before and beyond to rule over, man king," Basekh snarled back. "This was only ever a pit stop, a frivolity for us, a peculiarity. It was based its covenant with your father that kept us here this long, dutiful as she is." Basekh nodded to this, then looked to the king. At last, he reached his conclusion, and answered, "Very well then, we accept Basekh as our guardian and guarantor of the crown, the throne and the tabernacle of the kingdom before and beyond." He then stepped down from the elevated throne, approached the two cats, and his beautiful kitten, whose ears he scratched, and whom walked between his legs rubbing affectionately against them, covering him in their scent. "But, though I release you from your oath, I do hope you will stop by again." "Of course, sire," she replied and bowed, Basekh looking on amused at how his beautiful concubine, bound by no such oath to this sack of food, prostrates herself in such indignity for these strange creatures, or maybe not, we'll see. "Time to go, Basekh." Tears rolling down her furry, fierce face, she looked upon her child one last time, and the two giant cats strode out of the throne room, the town, and the kingdom, never to return.